The galactic predators touched down in the mist-covered jungle, their landing quiet but precise. Each one, clad in dark, polished armor, bristled with weapons and hunting tools, equipped with everything needed to dispatch prey with swift brutality. Their movements were fluid, effortless, yet calculated, revealing they were hunters of many worlds. Each had hunted across star systems, pursuing prey as weak as crawling pests or as mighty as monstrous beasts. But today, their target was a human, a mere speck in the cosmic scheme. This hunt, for them, would be a simple, quick pleasure. Or so they believed. They spread out in formation, sensors scanning through the trees, brushing over thick undergrowth, their eyes dissecting every shadow. They were a species that thrived on the thrill of stalking, of domination, taking pride in their efficient, unrelenting approach to the hunt. The jungle around them, shrouded in fog and the hum of unseen creatures, seemed ordinary, just like the countless other alien environments they'd conquered. But one of them paused, perhaps sensing a slight shift in the air, a detail that didn't fit. The hunter couldn't place it. Something was off, but he dismissed it quickly, confident in their mission. After all, this was just a human. Far deeper within the jungle, a figure moved silently, listening with acute awareness as the predators fanned out. The survivor, lean, focused, with movements that melted into the surrounding shadows, knew they were coming. They had anticipated the hunter's presence, sensing it even before the first leaf had stirred beneath their boots. Every step of theirs was calculated, almost like the jungle was guiding them. This wasn't just hiding, it was a careful orchestration of silence, of understanding that the slightest sound could give them away. As the predators advanced, they encountered the first clue. A single, lone boot print in the mud, positioned where anyone would expect a panicked creature to flee. They stopped, eyeing the print with contempt. The print led in a predictable direction, straight ahead, as though inviting them deeper into the heart of the jungle. And so they continued, allowing their target to feel chased, to believe it could escape. But in their confidence, they missed the subtle signs that surrounded that track, the snapped twigs arranged purposefully to mislead, the rock that seemed naturally out of place but was there for a reason they had yet to realize. The survivor observed their every move from a distance, hidden within the dense foliage. Eyes sharp, their senses tuned to every breath of the forest, every shiver of leaf and shadow. Years of survival training had taught them how to read the land as if it were an extension of their own body. Here they knew every root, every drop of dew hanging from leaves, every sound. They weren't merely hiding, they were blending, using every element to shroud their presence. As the predators delved further, their confidence swelled. Aware of nothing but their own superiority, they found another sign, a shred of fabric caught on a thorn bush. It was deliberate, planted with precision. The jungle itself seemed to grow more treacherous as they pressed onward, though they ignored it. One predator gave a silent, guttural laugh, flashing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. They thought of the human as desperate, clumsy. To them, this wasn't prey, it was a plaything. But then, one of them paused, his eyes narrowing as he examined a seemingly innocent branch overhead. It was broken, but something about its angle, about its position, triggered a pang of unease. He stared at it, caught in a split second of hesitation, before brushing it off as mere chance. He moved on, dismissing the warning that could have saved him. Hours passed as the hunt continued, the predators weaving through paths that seemed to twist in unexpected ways. They began to feel the jungle pressing in around them, a strange sensation of being watched that they dismissed as the effects of an unfamiliar environment. The survivor, however, was nearby, tracking them through an intricate network of hideouts and trails. Each decision they made, every turn, every careful step, was calculated with one purpose: staying 2 steps ahead. Then came the first sign that they were not in control. The lead hunter felt a tug on his ankle, barely perceivable before a wire he hadn't seen pulled taut, and with a swift snap, a heavy log swung from the canopy. It connected, catching him off guard and flinging him back, his armor cracking under the impact. The other hunters sprang into action, scanning the trees, yet saw nothing but shadows. Silence fell again, thicker than before. The predators exchanged glances, their expressions hardening, realizing that their prey was no ordinary target. The lone survivor had planned every inch of this encounter. And this was only the beginning. Another hunter growled, frustrated, and raised his weapon to fire randomly into the foliage, shattering branches and tearing through the thick vines. He didn't notice the thin, almost invisible line stretched between two tree trunks. He triggered it with a careless step, and a hidden spike trap deployed, piercing his leg. He staggered, hissing in pain as he yanked himself free, the wound searing. The remaining hunters closed ranks, their confidence wavering. Their prey was clearly capable, unpredictable, and perhaps deadlier than any prey they'd faced. They felt, for the first time, the sting of being outmaneuvered. And the survivor, watching from above, saw the effect of their work. They observed the rising frustration, the shaken resolve, and a quiet satisfaction stirred within them. As the predators continued forward, now slower, their guard raised, they could feel an invisible pressure growing. This was no simple chase. They were moving into the heart of an elaborate game. Every rustle, every subtle shift in the jungle around them seemed like it was part of the survivor's plan, as though the forest itself had joined forces to defend one of its own. Hours turned into a seemingly endless march as they moved deeper, each step feeling heavier than the last. Their nerves were stretched thin, their initial arrogance now replaced by an undercurrent of tension. The jungle seemed to have turned against them, twisting with hidden threats they could not anticipate. The survivor allowed them a glimpse, a shadow darting just out of reach, a flicker of movement in their peripheral vision. They raised their weapons, prepared to shoot, but it was gone before they could react. This was not a fight. This was psychological warfare, played out in the thick mist of the jungle, where every step could be their last. The hunters were now the hunted. They pressed on, their pride unwilling to let them retreat, but they understood now, this would not be a clean, simple kill. Their target was not simply human. They were an apex survivor, a master of the environment, and each moment drew them deeper into a trap from which they might never escape. The predators pressed forward with cautious steps, their formation tighter than before, eyes sharp and senses alert. Each one felt the weight of the hunt shifting. Their prey had not only survived but turned their very tactics against them. Every trap they'd encountered had been meticulously placed, designed not merely to harm but to unnerve. The jungle around them, once just a backdrop, now felt like a living, breathing adversary. They could feel it in the silence, in the steady rustle of leaves and whisper of the wind, and in the way shadows seemed to deepen when their backs were turned. The jungle was an accomplice, conspiring with this human who moved like a ghost through its depths. The alien leader raised a hand, signaling his team to slow, his eyes fixed on the faint outline of a trail up ahead. It looked like the human's path, a subtle line leading deeper into the dense canopy, almost beckoning. They advanced, trying to maintain control over their breaths, each heartbeat loud in the heavy stillness. The leader's steps fell quietly, but his mind was anything but calm. He was beginning to understand that this was not an ordinary chase. This was a strategy, every part of it deliberate, each footstep part of an invisible map crafted by their prey. The thought unsettled him, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt broke through his heart and mind. As they moved along the trail, the hunter closest to the left side stopped suddenly. Something felt wrong, a sense he couldn't quite explain. But before he could speak, the ground shifted beneath him. He glanced down, just as the earth gave way, and he plunged into a hidden pit, landing hard on jagged spikes below. His scream echoed briefly before it faded into silence, leaving the rest of the group frozen, eyes wide, gripping their weapons. The leader cursed under his breath, signaling for the others to spread out, to be more vigilant. But now, they understood just how dangerous their prey was. This wasn't a game. This human was capable of using not just strength or speed, but a level of cunning and strategy that defied their expectations. The jungle had become a minefield, one designed to break them mentally and physically. They pushed onward, staying closer, eyes scanning every inch of ground, every shadow. Ahead, another clue, a smear of blood on a tree trunk, fresh and dark against the bark. It could have been from the survivor, a mark left in haste, maybe from an injury. One of the hunters moved to examine it, his eyes narrowing. But as he reached out, he noticed too late the thin, almost invisible tripwire nestled just beside the tree. With a sharp snap, a concealed spear shot from the underbrush, piercing through the air in a deadly arc. He jerked back, narrowly avoiding the worst of it, but not without a deep gash across his arm. He growled, pain and frustration mingling as his blood dripped to the forest floor. The trap had been set with exacting precision, almost as if their prey had studied them, anticipated their movements. The group pulled together, tension growing among them. The jungle seemed to close in tighter, shadows lengthening with each passing second. The predator with the injured arm grimaced, trying to staunch the bleeding, but his frustration was palpable. This hunt was no longer just about pride or sport. It had become personal, a matter of survival. The survivor watched them from afar, eyes gleaming as they analyzed every reaction, every misstep. They knew the jungle as intimately as a second skin. Each tree, each vine, every inch of ground was a weapon in the right hands, and they wielded it expertly. Years of hard, relentless training had taught them to see the unseen, to hear the silent, to become one with any environment. They moved to another vantage point, silently preparing the next trap. A series of vines were pulled tight across a narrow pathway, secured between trees and weighted with stones that would fall with a carefully calculated momentum. The predators, bleeding and tense, were moving directly toward it, oblivious to the snare just ahead. The leader, by now, felt the gnaw of fear, though he'd never admit it. His senses, usually so keen, now felt dulled, muted by an overwhelming sense of unease. He'd hunted creatures more fearsome than this, he told himself, monsters that could tear metal apart with a single claw. But this was different. This was a human, resourceful, silent, dangerous in ways he hadn't anticipated. The group approached the rigged path, stepping over the vines without seeing them, when a slight disturbance set off the trap. Stones cascaded down from the trees, crashing around them in a deafening roar. The predators ducked, narrowly dodging the worst of it, but the noise and sudden attack left them disoriented, pushing them closer to the edge of panic. One of the younger hunters let out a guttural snarl, firing blindly into the underbrush, weapon crackling with deadly energy as it tore through branches and leaves. But the survivor was already gone, moving swiftly to another hidden spot, leaving nothing but silence and shadows in their wake. The forest swallowed the gunfire, leaving an eerie stillness that only amplified the predator's unease. They regrouped, shaken, adrenaline pumping as they glanced around warily. The leader's resolve hardened, his mind scrambling for a new strategy. They would not be outsmarted by a mere human. They would turn this around, find their target, and end it. But the jungle, in its endless, silent vastness, seemed to mock them with every step. Up ahead, the survivor waited by the next trap, a narrow pass between two thick tree trunks, where they had set up a snare that would trigger branches to spring forward with a force capable of knocking down even the strongest of the hunters. They watched, patient and unyielding, as the group approached. The first predator stepped forward, eyes darting, and then, snap, the branches swung, catching him off guard and slamming him into the ground. The impact left him dazed, his weapon clattering uselessly beside him. Before he could rise, he felt a sharp, invisible pressure on his chest, a reminder of just how quickly the tables had turned. The other predators looked on, some in silent horror, as their comrade lay stunned. This human had transformed the jungle into a battlefield, each inch a testament to their skill and precision. Every mistake the hunters made, every trap they triggered, served only to fuel their desperation. But the survivor was far from finished. This was only the beginning, a prelude to what they had in store. The predators had stepped into a game they could not win, one orchestrated with such calculated malice that each trap seemed to echo a single message: "You are not welcome here." They regrouped once more, their confidence fractured but their resolve sharpening. They would adapt, they would survive. They would find this human and prove their worth. But deep within them, in the quiet recesses of their minds, the first seeds of fear had been planted. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the survivor watched, expression unreadable, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The jungle was theirs, each shadow an ally, every breath a warning. The hunt was far from over, and they had only just begun. The predators moved slowly, their initial confidence stripped away. What had begun as a leisurely hunt had turned into a nightmare. The jungle felt like it was closing in on them, each branch reaching out, each shadow hiding a threat. Their movements, once graceful and silent, had become cautious, tense. They felt watched, tracked by an enemy who was no longer prey but a relentless shadow, haunting their every step. One of the hunters took point, his senses stretched thin, every sound amplified in his mind. He was ready to shoot at anything that moved. Behind him, the others followed, glancing over their shoulders, anticipating the next strike. The ground beneath them felt unpredictable, and every leaf and root seemed to whisper warnings they could no longer ignore. Then, the first true sign of their reversal and roles emerged, a flash of movement to their right, barely visible in the periphery. The hunter at the rear turned quickly, raising his weapon. But it was gone. Just a flicker, just enough to unsettle them further. They continued forward, yet the weight of being watched grew, pressing down on them. They were no longer the hunters. They were prey. A sound broke through the silence, a sharp rustle in the underbrush. One of them turned to fire, his weapon illuminating the trees as he unleashed a hail of energy bolts into the foliage. But nothing was there. Only stillness, broken branches, and scattered leaves. When he lowered his weapon, the silence that followed was suffocating. Every shot had been in vain, each burst of light only deepening the shadows. Suddenly, without warning, the predator at the front went down. He had stepped on something, a concealed pit lined with sharp stakes. His fall was quick, brutal, and his scream echoed briefly before cutting off. The others froze, weapons raised, but there was no sign of their assailant. Only the deep, waiting shadows. The survivor was closer than they imagined, watching their every move. Their fall was methodical, deliberate. They understood these hunters now, their instincts, their vulnerabilities. This jungle, twisted and dense, was a weapon that the survivor wielded with precision. Each trap was set with one purpose: to strip away every ounce of confidence, every scrap of composure, until the hunters broke under the weight of their own fear. The remaining predators pressed on, but now they moved in a tight cluster, backs to one another, each trying to cover a direction. Their breaths were quick, eyes darting from one shadow to the next, every step weighted with the dread that the next moment could be their last. Another rustle came, this time from above. The hunters looked up just in time to see a figure moving through the canopy, silent as a phantom. They fired, a blaze of energy slicing through the branches, but the survivor was gone before a single shot could find its mark. The shots crackled into the empty air, falling short, adding only to the creeping realization that they were outmatched. The leader growled, furious, his voice low as he barked commands to his remaining team. They needed to split up, flank their enemy. It was a desperate, almost frantic move, but in their minds, it was the only option left. To move together was to be picked off one by one, but to split up meant they could cover more ground, forcing the survivor to choose. And so, they broke formation, peeling off in separate directions. But this too had been anticipated. The survivor tracked their movements, aware of every shifting footfall, every telltale sound. It was a dance of silence, a deadly game in which they held every advantage. Moving through the trees, they waited, observing each hunter as they fell into the trap. One of the hunters, isolated now, pressed forward along a narrow trail, his eyes darting left and right. The survivor lay hidden ahead, cloaked in shadows, eyes calm, every muscle poised. As the predator neared, a branch shifted underfoot, triggering a cascade of rocks that tumbled down from above. The hunter threw up his arms, but it was too late. The rocks struck hard, sending him sprawling to the ground. When he tried to rise, his strength failed him. He lay still, aware that he had been beaten, his pride shattered. Elsewhere, another hunter prowled along a ridge, glancing behind him with every step, his nerves on edge. The survivor was there too, close, silent. A trap lay ready, a vine stretched tight between two trees. The hunter didn't see it. One step was all it took, and the vine snapped upward, coiling around his leg and yanking him off balance. He crashed to the ground, the jungle swallowing his shout of frustration. The leader, unaware of his dwindling team, continued through the jungle with grim determination. He was the last one now, his pride forcing him onward even as every step felt heavier. His mind was clouded, a mix of anger and fear, unwilling to accept defeat. He would find the human, he told himself. He would finish this. But the survivor had other plans. As the leader approached a clearing, a shape appeared in the distance, just a flicker, enough to draw his attention. He raised his weapon, adrenaline surging. This was it, his chance. But as he fired, the figure vanished, slipping back into the shadows, leaving only the empty jungle. Frustrated, he advanced, gun raised, his eyes scanning every inch of the clearing. And then he felt it, a presence behind him, silent as death. He spun, but the survivor moved faster, blending with the shadows, staying just out of reach. They were not here to kill him yet. This was a lesson, a silent declaration that he was no longer the apex predator. A voice whispered from the shadows, calm and unyielding. "This is my territory." The leader staggered back, realization dawning. He was alone, surrounded, the last of his kind on this planet, and every shadow, every tree, seemed to pulse with the knowledge that he would not leave. The survivor faded back into the jungle, leaving him alone, his breath coming fast, his grip on his weapon tightening as he turned in every direction, desperate to catch a glimpse of his enemy. But there was nothing. Only silence, heavy and suffocating. He understood now, truly and fully. This human was no ordinary prey, no simple creature to be hunted. This was an apex survivor, a master of the jungle, one who had turned every advantage against them, who had shattered their pride and laid bare their vulnerabilities. The leader's weapon shook in his hand, and he lowered it slowly, defeated. He had come here with arrogance, expecting an easy victory. But this planet, this jungle, and this human had taught him a lesson he would carry to his final breath. He had underestimated the resilience, the cunning, the indomitable spirit of a survivor forged in the harshest of environments. And now, as he stood alone in the darkening jungle, he knew that he would not make it out alive. The leader stood alone in the jungle's thick, oppressive silence. His breaths were shallow, each inhale bringing him a whiff of damp earth and decaying leaves, the wild scent of the jungle mingling with the bitter tang of his own fear. He could feel the weight of the place pressing in on him, an invisible force pulling at his pride, his confidence, all that he had come to rely on as a hunter. He was alone now, his once reliable team reduced to memories in the shadows, one after the other. Clenching his jaw, he adjusted his grip on his weapon, its cold metal a fleeting comfort. He glanced around, eyes darting to every corner, every rustling leaf, seeking a glimpse of his elusive adversary. But there was nothing. Just trees and vines and endless shadows. He could still hear them, though, the quiet reminders of his fallen team, their voices that seemed to echo in the still air, each whispering the same bitter truth. He was the last one left. And even that, he realized, was by design. The hunter took a step forward, moving slowly, with the same caution that he'd once mocked his prey for using. Each footfall was careful, controlled. He'd abandoned any hope of a straightforward fight. He knew now that his survival lay in strategy, in reclaiming the advantage that had been so thoroughly stripped from him. But as he moved, a faint sound brushed against his ear, a low, distant hum, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It wasn't his, nor was it an animal's. This was deliberate, purposeful, a lure drawing him deeper. He followed the sound, tension coiled in his every muscle, his senses flaring, tuned to even the faintest change around him. The hum grew louder, leading him into a dense cluster of trees, thick vines hanging low, casting the ground beneath in a dim, muted glow. His heart beat faster, his weapon raised, eyes fixed on the shadows ahead. Then, with one swift movement, the sound stopped. He froze, waiting, his finger hovering just above the trigger. And that's when he saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees, low and close to the ground, a reflection off something metallic. The survivor's trap, another one, he was certain. He approached, step by calculated step, scanning the ground, expecting a hidden snare or concealed pit. But as he neared, he realized the glint was no weapon, no cleverly laid tripwire. It was something entirely unexpected, a row of stones laid out in a circle, and within it, a small fire, barely more than embers now, glowing faintly in the dimness. Beside it was a makeshift seat fashioned from broken branches, and resting atop it, a crude carving, a symbol, a warning etched in the language of his kind, marked deep into the wood. The leader paused, his grip tightening on his weapon. This was no longer simply a hunt. This was a message, a taunt crafted by a mind as sharp and calculating as his own. The human knew him, understood him, down to the smallest detail of his arrogance, his pride, and had left this symbol as a reminder. A testament that this jungle, this fight, was entirely under the survivor's control. He took a step back, then another, his instincts firing warnings that even his honed skills couldn't dismiss. Just as he turned, a sound, a quick, barely perceptible rustle, came from behind him. He spun, weapon raised, every nerve on edge, ready to strike. But the space before him was empty, save for the swaying of leaves and the endless press of the jungle. His mind raced, images of his fallen team flashing through him, each one taken down with precision, each one outmaneuvered, outthought. The survivor was here. Somewhere close. Watching. He knew it with a certainty that set his skin crawling, a feeling that stripped away his every ounce of bravado. This was no longer a battle for dominance. This was survival in its rawest, truest form. He felt himself falter, for the first time in his long, bloody career, his focus slipping, his hands beginning to tremble. And then, he saw it, the shadowy form of his adversary, slipping between trees, barely visible, just a flicker, but unmistakable. Fueled by a surge of desperation, he lunged, his weapon drawn, releasing a barrage of shots into the space where he'd seen the figure. Energy bolts crackled through the trees, tearing leaves, charring bark, but they hit nothing solid. He advanced, firing again, each shot an act of mounting frustration, the fury of a predator who knew he was being outwitted, outmatched. In the silence that followed his shots, he heard it again, the quiet, controlled breathing, just close enough to make his skin prickle. It was no longer the sound of prey. It was the sound of a hunter who had spent every moment of the chase preparing, adapting, waiting for this very moment. With a final step forward, the figure emerged from the shadows, fully visible now, standing directly across from him, their gaze steady, calm. The leader hesitated, caught in a moment that felt like eternity, his weapon raised, but his will faltering. The humans stood before him, unarmed, fearless, every inch of their posture a declaration of triumph. "You came here as hunters." The survivor's voice was low, measured, each word deliberate, cutting through the silence with chilling clarity. "You thought you knew us. Thought you understood." They took a step forward, eyes fixed on the leader, who found himself rooted, unable to look away. "You see now, though. You see what it means to face us on our own ground." The leader's mind reeled, thoughts scrambling, desperately searching for a way out, a final move, a stroke of luck. But there was nothing. The jungle was silent, the shadows still, and the weight of defeat settled on him like a shroud. In that last moment, he lowered his weapon, a gesture of reluctant acceptance, his pride finally breaking under the crushing truth. He understood now, painfully, that he had been outmatched, not by brute force, but by a skill, an adaptability, that he could never hope to overcome. And as the survivor stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as quietly as they had come, the leader felt the oppressive silence close in around him once more. He sank to his knees, his vision blurring as the reality of his defeat settled in. The jungle had turned against him, the very ground he had once thought his domain now felt foreign, hostile. His last breaths were shallow, filled with the scent of damp earth and the bitter tang of failure, a cruel reminder of the hunt that had turned him from predator to prey. And somewhere, deep within the trees, the survivor watched, a silent witness to their victory, the apex survivor who had bested the galaxy's most ruthless hunters, leaving them as nothing more than echoes in the shadows. The jungle had returned to silence. The thick, damp air hung heavy, swallowing any last trace of movement as if erasing the events that had just unfolded. Among the towering trees and twisted vines, Nothing moved but the shifting shadows and the faint ripple of leaves in the breeze. Where the alien hunter had knelt, admitting defeat, there was only a broken spear, the remnants of his pride left behind in the dirt. The survivor stood just beyond, hidden in the dense brush, surveying the aftermath. Every trap, every step, every calculated move had led to this, the end of a hunt that had become a war. The jungle, their ally and weapon, was still, acknowledging the victory in a quiet, respectful hush. This was not a boastful victory, not a triumph to be celebrated with cheers or trophies. It was survival in its rawest form, hard-won and unforgiving, a battle waged with no room for error. For a moment, the survivor allowed themselves a breath, a slow, controlled release of tension that had been held tight for hours. It felt strange, almost foreign, to relax even slightly after the relentless chase. But they couldn't linger, they knew better. There would be others. The predators would not rest with the loss of one hunting party. They would come back, possibly in greater numbers, armed with new weapons, new tactics. This was not an end, only a pause. Still, there was a message that needed sending. Stepping forward, the survivor examined the remnants left behind, the symbols etched into the alien leader's discarded weapon. They took a knife from their belt, carefully carving into the broken spear, a mark, a warning. A series of symbols written in the predator's language, a message crafted not with words but with the weight of a story, the weight of everything that had happened here. "This is our ground," it declared. "You are not welcome here." Satisfied, they lodged the spear upright in the earth, the symbols facing out toward the jungle's edge, where the hunters had first entered, confident and unchallenged. Now, those who came upon this place would see it as a warning. They would know, in their bones, that here, they were no longer the hunters. Turning away, the survivor moved silently back through the jungle. Every step was measured, purposeful, without haste or hesitation. They knew this land, its sounds and silences, its twists and shadows. They had lived here, adapted to it, not as an invader but as part of its vast, interwoven life. Every leaf, every root, every whisper of wind belonged to them, as they belonged to it. The darkness began to deepen as night fell, the jungle folding into itself, preparing for the quiet. But the survivor was alert, moving with practiced ease, knowing that they must vanish as completely as the predators had entered. They found the clearing where they had camped before, the embers of a small fire long cooled, footprints leading away into the undergrowth. With quick hands, they brushed away any remaining traces, covering their tracks, returning the ground to its natural state. Nothing would betray their presence here, not even the faintest trace. As they finished, a sudden noise pierced the quiet, a soft, rhythmic hum. It wasn't close, but it was enough to signal the approach of another ship. They looked up, eyes narrowing, assessing the sound, and felt the familiar tension settle back into their muscles. Another hunting party. They would keep coming. The predators never learned, never understood that this world was not theirs to claim. But the survivor was ready. They had fought for this ground, for every inch of soil and tree and hidden path. This was their jungle, their battleground, and every time the hunters came, they would face the same fate. For here, in this place, the rules were different. Here, the hunted was the hunter, the prey was the predator, and each would-be conqueror would leave broken, defeated, their pride turned to dust beneath the survivor's silent, unrelenting resolve. With one last look at the jungle's edge, the survivor melted into the shadows, vanishing as the hum of the approaching ship grew louder, its engines pulsing through the trees, stirring the leaves into a trembling dance. The jungle awaited its next visitors, silent and watchful, its hidden guardian prepared, ready for the hunt to begin anew. And somewhere, far above, the message on the broken spear awaited its audience.